Okay, the Washington Monument. Now these plans I was able to download off the internet, but they're kind of difficult to read, so I'm going to read them to you. All right, the total height of the Washington Monument is 550 feet. That goes from the base up to the very tip. Now, the height of the capstone is 50 feet. So that means that the rectangular prism, we're going to assume this is a rectangular prism, as I mentioned up here, and I think I mentioned it in class as well. The width of the base is 54 feet. That's down here. And the width of the top of the obelisk underneath the capstone is 34 feet. So we're going to assume an average of 44 feet, and we're going to call it a rectangular prism. Even though it's not exactly a rectangular prism, for our purposes, it will be. So as I mentioned before, the total height is 550 feet, and the height of just the rectangular prism is 500 feet. Okay, so as we think about what dimensions would be appropriate for our model, let's keep in mind it has to be attached to the foam board, and if it's too tall, then it's going to be difficult to attach it securely, and it might tip over, especially if we're bringing it in on a windy day. All right, so we're going to assume a width of 44 feet for the rectangular prism, and let's figure out what would be an appropriate scale factor. Well, let's see, if we start with 1 over 100. Okay, so let's start with 44 feet. That's the dimensions of the square base. One of the sides is 44. All the sides are 44 feet. And if we're going to see what 1 over 100 is, then we're going to take 1/100th of 44, which of course is 0.44 feet. Okay, so that's less than half of a foot. That doesn't seem too bad, but now if we apply that to the height, so the height of the entire structure is 550. If we multiply that by 1 over 100, then we're going to get 5.5 or 5.5 feet. I'm pretty sure 5.5 feet would be way too big to fit on a foam board, since most of you are not even quite that tall. So we need to choose a smaller scale factor. Should we go to 1 over 200? All right, so let's start with 1 over 200. Now, let's start with talking about the height. The height is going to be the dominant dimension when we're figuring out what is the appropriate scale factor to use, because it's so much taller than it is wide. So let's talk about the height. It's 550 feet. If we're going to apply a scale factor of 1 over 200, then we're going to end up with a height of 2.75 feet. And that doesn't seem that terrible. However, I still think it's going to be difficult to keep that figure securely attached to the foam board. Let's try a little bit smaller. What if we tried something like 500, so 1 over 500. Now we're talking about 1.1 feet. Now keep in mind, that's not 1 feet and 1 inch, that's 1 feet and 1/10 of a feet. So which is close to, it's a little bit more than a foot, right? That's kind of small, but I think it would work. You can try others if you would like. Somewhere in between, maybe 550 times 1 over 400. Which is 1.375. So again, a little bit taller than a foot, a little bit taller than the scale factor we used up here, 1 over 500. Again, you can figure out what works for you, but I would stay away from anything taller than this. This would be way too tall. I think you should start with something in this range. You guys can decide which one you want to use. And then you want to finish the calculations. So there's the height, and then there's we need to finish out the calculation. Let's say we choose the 1 over 400, so then we have to do the other dimension, which is the width. Remember, we're using the average width of 44 feet. Multiply that by 1 over 400, and we get 0.11 feet. Again, that's going to be pretty small, but that's not too bad. We can convert that to inches to give ourselves an idea of what that's going to be like. So let me take that 0.11 feet and figure out what that would be in inches. Well, we have to convert it. We know that there are 12 inches in a foot, so we're going to multiply that by 12 inches. And of course, I'm multiplying by a ratio of 1. And this is a ratio of 1 because 12 inches equals 1 foot, 1 feet. I guess we can make this foot, right? To be grammatically correct. And this is 1.32 inches, just to give ourselves an idea. So that's pretty small. Remember, that's pretty small, but I think it would work. If you, like I said, if you want to choose a different scale factor, that's fine. But you just take the dimensions, 550 for the height and 44 for the width, multiply by your scale factor to figure out what scale factor you might want to use. Now, the height of the capstone. Actually, don't worry about the height of the capstone. We'll deal with that later. But you have a general sense now of how to do this. You guys should have good practice after having done the other two. I'm going to end this video now since it is over 6 minutes long, and I will see you in class tomorrow. And in class tomorrow, we will figure out how to determine the base and the slant height of the pyramid, the capstone that sits on top.